Hi, everyone. I'm registered dietitian Libby Parker, and I have a special guest on today's episode for you. Alisa Hurwitz, also known as Dr. Drama, is a licensed psychologist who works with Broadway actors and consults on Broadway shows about mental health in the theater. I can't wait for you to see this amazing interview where we get a little off track because it's quarantine time and talk about that, but you're going to get a lot of great tips for mental health out of this video. Hi, so I have Dr. Drama with me today, Alisa Hurwitz.
Hi, Libby.
So glad that you're here. We're going to be talking about mental health in the theater. And first, I just want to dig into, what you're doing in the theater as a psychologist. How did you get to consulting on shows?
Yeah, that's been a little bit more of a relatively recent addition. The story is that I've been a psychologist professionally for my whole career. Postgraduate school, and but I've been a theater lover my whole life, and got to a point in my work life where it was comfortable. It wasn't quite the same challenge. And so I wanted a challenge, and I just had an epiphany one day of finding a way to combine my passion for theater with my professional knowledge, by talking about theater and psychology. Really the original idea was to write about it. And that quickly then morphed into doing interviews. And then that ended up being a springboard and a platform for consulting on shows, and doing talkbacks. And so it's been anything from consulting on production for an established show, and doing talkbacks like for a musical like Next to Normal, which has obvious mental health content, to consulting on new material. There was recently the world premiere off Broadway of a new play called Indoor Person by Kayla Martin, which is about the main character has agoraphobia. And so working with them through the creative process and the rehearsal process to develop the show and have it informed with professional input. And it's just a thrill. I love it.
That's so cool. So remind me, what's agoraphobia?
Yeah. So it is a phobia of going outside. And
Oh, wow.
yeah. And of course, anxiety causes avoidance. So people who have agoraphobia avoid going outside, and they become when it's severe, they stay in their houses.
So we're all kind of experiencing without the anxiety piece per se.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be some agoraphobia developed right now for people who already have a propensity to anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a tough time in so many ways. There's a special challenge to it for the folks who have anxiety. Folks who have obsessive compulsive disorder, this is a really hard time.
Yeah.
And anxiety. I mean, we're all having anxiety, through this, like a functional anxiety, because it's scary.
Yeah. And this video is probably going out a little bit later. So we're filming this during quarantine right now,
Yeah.
and I think we're all getting a little stir crazy. But yeah, I definitely think about I don't have agoraphobia, but I definitely think about the fear of like going out into public places right now, like to go grocery shopping or something. There's that fear of, ooh, am I gonna get something out there? So it's
Right.
the people that already been struggling with that.
Right. And it's been interesting too, talking with, in my work life and talking with, patients. So like we were talking about earlier, like switching to telemedicine 100%. So, have a regular work week seeing people and hearing a whole range of responses to what's going on. So for some people, this being at home is so hard because they're extroverts. They get refueled by interacting with people. And there are ways, of course, that we know we can interact without being in person, but it's not the same for them. And then there are people who are like, oh, they're almost embarrassed to say that they don't like being at home, like that aspect of it is actually not so bad for them, to the point where they actually like it. They feel bad because they know like it's a bad situation, but they're really comfortable. So, people just are having a range of reactions, and some people are having a hard time, and some people with that aspect, and some people are not.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing a whole range of stuff with my eating disorder clients as well. So,
Yeah, food access is an issue.
oh yeah, we're having a lot of conversations around, so many people get stuck on their very specific foods, like specific product from a specific brand, and that's the only safe food they have. And then they go to the store and it's sold out right now. And so we're working on a lot of food exposure.
Yeah. The folks I see who are on the autism spectrum, I don't know if you ever work with them, around their restrictive menus. And it's to the extent there'll be like 3 things they eat, and it's this specific brand of macaroni and cheese made this specific way, and their parents can't get it.
Yeah.
They just don't eat.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point, you got to hope they eventually get hungry enough to eat something.
Right.
But it's so hard, and it's so anxiety provoking for people that are stuck in this. And I just keep telling everyone it will end, and we got to do what we got to do right now, and things will get better, but we got to push through. So where would I want to go with all the theater stuff? Everything is going quarantine related right now, and that's fine. I want to.
Where everybody's minds are at, for sure. It's weird because theater, the heart of the theater world, Broadway, is closed down right now, and that's so unprecedented. I mean, there was a union strike in, I forget what year it was. 2006, I might be wrong, 2007. And that lasted for, again, I know I'm wrong, but it was something like 10 days. But that wasn't scary.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was 9/11, and I think shows started coming back after 2 days. And that was scary and upsetting. But theater is community. It is gathering. It is as old as culture, as we've been creating art, and we need it. We need it for so many reasons, including the gathering. And then to be going through this hard time and then not be able to gather is really hard. For those of us who go to the theater because it is emotionally healing, because it is therapeutic, and now we can't go there. But I know I found that I've had solace so much. I always love cast recordings. I grew up on cast recordings, but they've just become especially valuable right now. Like, I feel connected to, what Broadway is, even though it's not happening that way, by listening to my favorite cast albums right now. I feel connected to the community, to the gathering. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that, that meaning and that value as well.
Yeah. And see, I'm having the total opposite reaction to that of like, I don't want to listen to any of that. And I even, got Broadway HD for the month, and I watched a couple shows, but I'm like, it makes me more sad to experience this stuff, because I know I can't go out and see it and do it. And, I actually do the acting too. So like, I want to go be in something, and there isn't even auditions to really like be thinking about right now. And it's so hard I'm not motivated to work on anything. Like I'm in that like should place of like, I should work on a monologue. I should work on my audition book, blah, blah, blah. And like, I have zero desire, because it's just, there's that little, and I know it's not true, it's that little feeling of hopelessness of like, oh, when is this going to ever happen again? Like, I might as well just take this time to rest.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's where most people are at, honestly. I think at first there was this kind of messaging going on, like, oh, the creative people are going to be able to get so much creating done, because now you have the time, even if you're still working, like, they don't have those obligations outside of the house. It's not the same. And I think we're all finding that because we're living through a pandemic, which is a crisis, that the bandwidth just isn't there, and that's okay, because we're really just we're trying to survive.
Yeah.
When you're trying to survive, you're not creating. And I don't know, maybe there are some people who have been able to create, and that's just kind of where they're able to put their energy. But it's like being in the middle of a war zone and like sitting down and writing a sonnet.
Yeah.
Like some people do that, but most don't.
Yeah.
So we just have to give ourselves permission to not be productive,
100%.
to just get through.
It's been so crazy. It's just, I want to just curl up in a little ball, and like, I feel like I'm doing very well compared to a lot of people, but it's exhausting. Like, I was single parenting for the first time for over a week without having any help, any babysitters, anything, because no one would come near us, because my husband is a ER nurse, so he was exposed and lived separate for a while. And I was like, I'm just so drained chasing after a 1-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
I have her nap times, and that's when I'm like getting stuff done. And then at the end of the day, I'm just zonked. Nothing creative is happening, nothing extra.
Yeah.
There's, I'm not doing my garden or anything. Like, it's survival mode, like glass of wine, we're sitting and watching Netflix.
Totally. The bandwidth is just used up, right? So you don't have that extra, kind of community support or family support out of necessity. Like that's what we have to do to keep safe. But it's and it's just all you can do just to make it through the day. It's almost like when a kid having a newborn, and it's like, listen, did you keep them alive today? Did you care for them and keep them alive? And that is it. That's all you have to do. And just like let all those other expectations go, because this won't last forever.
Yeah.
We will get to the other side of this, and we can get back to living life, maybe not exactly as we know it right away, but like, pretty close to how it was. And we can get back, to having the bandwidth for those things. So it's not like this is something that we have to figure out how to be creative in this state forever. And so right now, just making it through. And so if that for you, right, means like not listening to cast albums because it makes you sad. Mm-hmm. And for me, it means listening to cast albums because it makes me feel connected and happy. Yeah. Then that's what we do.
Yeah.
Right? There's no right answer.
Absolutely. So tell me, what do you do when you consult on a show? Like if you're going in and helping the actors with the mental health aspects of a show, what does that look like?
It can be anything from talking about the content, the words on the page, and kind of giving some insight or some information into what that means from a technical point of view, from a psychology point of view, and giving that information. For me, my style is just to give it and let it go, because the shows aren't meant to be documentaries. So I don't expect that the show is supposed to present that, material in a way that is 100%, kind of loyal to what the kind of the scientific truth is. But I give them that information. Actors are so smart, and they take that and they interpret it and integrate it into their understanding of the work that they're doing. So for example, like a show like Next to Normal, which I've actually had the pleasure of consulting on 2 productions of that. And I'm sure that one will come up again. I'll work on that show again. But like I had worked with a local theater company, a wonderful theater company called Q0 here in New Hampshire, and they they just sitting with them in rehearsal and kind of giving information about what bipolar disorder is technically, from like a diagnostic standpoint. Yeah. And what, when they referred to the medications, which they never name, like what those probably were and how they would impact, how they would affect her symptom presentation and her experience, her internal experience. And kind of some information about like there's like 2 doctors in that musical, who are significant characters, and kind of talking about how they are presented in the show, or how they're presented in the page, how that is, how close that is to ideal and how far that is from ideal. Yeah. and they take that and they go with it, and it's beautiful. And they just, like I said, they just take that and integrate it into their understanding of the show.
That's so cool. So I've only seen Next Normal once, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
there's a couple things that you just said in there that I want to ask your thoughts on, because it really stood out to me. So number one, I didn't even think about the fact they didn't name the medications, and I love that, because I think for people who are on specific medications, that would make them say, oh, well, that wasn't my experience, or that's not real, or
Yeah.
there's so many different ways it could be interpreted. So
Yeah.
that's comment I like that about the script, that if they don't name them. And then what was your thoughts on the rock star doctor? I love that part.
Yeah, I really love that part. It actually picks up on quite a truth about the therapeutic alliance, that there can be this idealizing of the therapist, and then for that character of Diane, who there's a overtly sexualized aspect to her, and she kind of leans on that part of her personality. And so for her, it totally makes sense that her idealized version of her doctor would be there was like a kind of sexiness to his rock star, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was fantastic and really insightful into how she would view the therapist, and how kind of she goes off into fantasy, and how that also is a coping skill for her, right? Because it's very uncomfortable and anxiety provoking to like have a first appointment with a therapist or a psychiatrist. And then so that's a way that she's able to kind of feel at a safe distance, because she escapes into that fantasy, and kind of imagines that he thinks that she's sexy. I think that's just utterly fantastic and funny.
Yeah. Perceptions, people. So I'm curious of your thoughts in theater when any type of therapist is portrayed. What I've often seen is they're wearing the white lab coat and everything, and it's like, that doesn't seem realistic. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it depends on the setting, right? Like in
Yeah.
an inpatient setting, if it's a psychiatrist, yes. If it's a psychologist, heck no. I mean, that's just not how we roll.
I know it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's been a lot more, like I'm thinking of the show, like On a Clear Day You Can See Forever, which is like wonky. I don't know if you've ever
I
seen
haven't
that,
seen
but
that one, but yeah.
It's a combination of of presenting like psychoanalysis and also like past life regression. It's very wonky. I think it was written in the 60s. And I think there's been like notable productions of that where the psychiatrist who would have, back in the day, they would have also done the psychoanalysis. Wears a white lab coat. So, but that whole show is just like a little bit of a hot mess. But for the most part, I think in musicals, it's been pretty accurate, or reasonably accurate presentations that I've seen of the therapeutic relationship. It's more when we get into movies and television where there's a lot more of it that's problematic. It's actually interesting. For example, a lot of the therapeutic relationships in film have been presented as a female therapist and a male patient, and then there's a sexual relationship between them, which is right. It's amoral and unethical for us to do, and yet over 90% of the sexual transgressions that happen between a doctor and a patient in the therapeutic relationship are with a male therapist and a female patient. So it's so weird that it's like it's completely flip-flop in the way that it's presented, at least in the medium of film. But in theater, it's been nothing has like. Not nothing.
Falsettos did that.
Stuff has been good. What's that? Falsettos? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I just watched. I haven't finished watching it, but I was watching that one, and they end up in a relationship, and I'm like, oh, I didn't want that to happen. It felt weird.
It is weird. That's why it felt weird.
Yes.
Because it is weird.
Yes.
Because it's
So
wrong.
for all
It's
of
just
you watching, don't go looking for your soulmate in a therapy session or
no,
a
no,
dietitian.
no.
That's not what we're here for.
If your therapist wants suggests seeing you outside of the therapeutic room for coffee, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Red flag. Yeah. The boundaries are so important. They're the framework. It's like, how can you have a house without framework? You can't. And that's what therapy is. And that's part of the boundaries are the framework.
Yeah, you need that
The rules of
neutral third
engagement.
party that's not in your life and invested in your life in that way
Yep.
to hold space for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Today's video is sponsored by my online course, Whole Health for Performers. All the health lessons you never learned in school, specifically for performers, so that you can give the performance of your life. You can enroll now for lifetime access for only $79. Check out the link in the description below this video to find out all about this course. What else about theater and mental health would you like to talk about?
Oh gosh. I'm really excited about the content that's out there right now. There's been kind of a new wave, this new wave of mental health musicals. It's something that I talk about. I've talked about in lectures and in pieces that I've written. Kind of the history of how mental health has been presented in musicals. So I was mentioning, like, On a Clear Day, You Can See Forever, or a show like Anyone Can Whistle, where the folks in there's questions like, what is sanity? The folks in the asylum are kind of let into town and let free, and these kind of much more exaggerated, almost farcical presentations of mental health in terms of treatment and therapeutic relationships. And then in recent years we've had what I call like the three great mental health musicals, three best mental health musicals in the last 2 decades. We have Next to Normal, which is just so smart and so insightful and so beautiful. We have Dear Evan Hansen, which also is such a fantastic presentation of, yeah, oh God, yeah. As a parent, So Big, So Small, please. Yeah. Very, very astute presentation of, if we're going to put a label on, of social anxiety, so well presented. And then the third one I would say is Jagged Little Pill, which presents several issues, including opioid addiction, gender identity, and then also trauma, so deftly. It's just so thrilling to kind of see such smart, insightful presentations of mental health content on stage. Right now, it's almost like it feels like, for someone like me, it feels like an embarrassment of riches, because I'm just so thrilled by the content in those shows and the conversations that they start as well.
Yeah, it's definitely been opening things up. Like seeing Dear Evan Hansen even got my husband and I to have a conversation about mental health, which we don't normally talk about. So it's cool that you can go to the theater with, friends or family and even just start the conversation there. And then, lots of people are taking it online and blogging about it, or, opening up whole conversations. So yeah, I love what theater does for us in so many ways.
Yeah. The conversation, being a conversation starter, I think, is what's so exciting about it. You might leave a show like Jagged Little Pill, and it has a conversation about sexual trauma in the show, and about what that anything, for a woman, like, or for anybody, anything against anybody of any gender, anything that is not consensual is assault, is sexual assault. And kind of one of the characters re-examines her own history because of something that's happening currently with someone her kid's age. And a lot of people leave that show affected by that and re-examining their own experiences. or a show like Waitress did a pretty decent job, even though it's a little lighter in tone for a lot of the show. It pretty deftly handles the topic of domestic violence.
Yeah.
I was especially, as a psychologist, wowed by how they dealt with the financial control aspect of domestic violence, which is not what people think about. People think about the kind of more firework piece of the physical abuse, which is awful too. But the control that
when you invest money,
yes, yeah, that happens, and they really nailed that. I think it's also interesting that I'm talking about Jagged Little Pill and I'm talking about Waitress, both of which, although they had the same female director, also were female directors and mostly female creative teams. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they were able to dive into that content, create a safe atmosphere, safe environment for the cast to examine that material and really nail it.
Yeah.
I think male directors can do that too, but I look at comparison. Yeah, you look at a show like West Side Story, which not only the current revival, Broadway is closed, which is a classic, one of the top classics of all time, and it has an attempted rape in it. And in this production, they have. I guess I am not going to see it because I personally don't want to contribute or give my money to a production that hired a sexual assaulter in one of the casts. The guys playing Bernardo, but I've read that the attempted rape scene is an actual rape scene, and it's very, very graphic. And how safe does that feel when you have a known sexual assaulter in the cast and the male creative team, male director, and it's like on video? They use a lot of video and projection in the production, which I think is interesting. I think that's an interesting concept. That's director's whole thing, but so it's in close up. Lord knows if they used an intimacy director or not. I don't know that, but it's just that's in contrast, male director.
Tell me about intimacy directors. That's something I don't know much about, and my viewers probably don't know much about.
So intimacy directors, basically they create the framework for it being safe to have physical intimacy, whether that's sexual or any kind of touch, anything that includes touch. So it can even be an intimacy director can be involved in fight scenes as well. So creating a framework for that being safe and for there being communication around what feels okay to people and what doesn't feel okay to people. And it's just such a great way to allow the cast to have a voice. Because you're already there's already a power dynamic with cast and director, right? So now you have this person whose role it is to help not only navigate those moments in the show, but also to be able to help advocate for you. But when it's done well, my understanding is that when it's done well, you hire an intimacy director at the beginning of a production. So those conversations happen beforehand, not after. Not after some, the blocking and the rehearsals already happened. So it's. I hope more and more and more shows are going to use intimacy directors. I know Jagged Little Pill did, which is I applaud them for doing that, because there is never mind any of the kind of physical touching that happens, but there's a number that is about sexual assault, and there's some pretty intimate touching in that. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so glad that they did what, they used an intimacy director so that the cast could feel safe in presenting, such an important story.
Yeah, I think so I'm really glad I'm hearing about this. I think the first time I heard about an intimacy director was actually at the panel you were on at Broadway Con, which is when we met.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. I didn't know that, because, I've only done community theater, so I didn't, we don't have that in our, minimal budget people that actually would do that around here. But, I think we get into this mindset that actors are just touchy-feely people and will do whatever for the job. And there's, even without it being a, explicit production with sexual assault or whatever, like just the
Yeah.
fact of some of the touch and kissing and stuff that, we do, depending on how that's done. Like, some of the stage kisses I've done, I had a amazing director who like spent a lot of time making sure we were comfortable and making sure that it looked right on stage and wasn't just like just go kiss each other, like
Mhm.
it was very thoughtful. And then I've had other directors. I mean, I had one director that we were in Tech Week for a show and didn't tell me, but told the guy playing my boyfriend on stage, like, "Oh, I want you to just go up and kiss her at this one point." And so he just came up and kissed me during rehearsal. I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, the director told me I should just do that." I'm like, "Okay," like I didn't mind, but that's me. Someone else might not have been okay with that, and I was just a little like thrown off because it was in the middle of a dance number. So like we're singing and we're dancing, all of a sudden he runs up, kisses me, and then like we go off and we're dancing around the circle. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, that happened." So
Right. That's such a great example of a moment that, that needs intimacy direction, because for so many people that wouldn't be okay. And that may be because they have a sexual assault history. And that may be because that's just not comfortable to them, you
mhm.
know? Yeah. So right. In community theater, it's not really a thing,
Yeah.
but it does seem to be gaining ground. In film also, you know, uh, that's been gaining ground. Or I've read that, but I'm just so pleased to hear. Yeah, the panel about Broadway and mental health that you were referring to. Uh, uh, who was it? It was Nora Shell from Jagged Little Pill was
Yeah.
referring to having an intimacy director on the show.
Yeah. I still haven't seen Jagged Little Pill, but that's on my list. And that was such a cool discussion. So this year at BroadwayCon 2020, there was some conversations around mental health, and um, the panel that we're referring to is, I believe, destigmatizing mental health in musical theater, or something to
And
that effect.
destigmatizing Broadway and mental health.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so Dr. Drama and
Mhm.
several Broadway actors were on this panel talking about their experiences with their own histories with mental health and how that was affecting their theatrical world, and talking about things like intimacy directors. And a
Mhm.
couple of the actors also brought up eating disorders, which
Yeah.
of course is what I do. So
Right.
that was particularly of interest to me. And also there's a video on the YouTube channel with Al Silber, who talks about her eating disorder and how that impacted her theater life too. So definitely check that video out.
And she's wonderful. She's such a
So wonderful.
incredible, insightful human.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's always worth hearing her
Oh
talk.
yeah. She's just a lovely human being.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious what, I know you don't see a lot of actors individually for psychotherapy, but what has been kind of your experience with eating disorders in the theater world, whether as portrayed on stage or, hearing that from actors that, it's something they're struggling with, and how Broadway and the theater world impacts their eating disorder or ability to recover.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, I know we've talked about this before offline, but just I don't you'd think, I love theater and psychology. You'd think I would want to see a lot of actors or have that as a niche. And that's not actually kind of where it's at for me. Although I do end up seeing a lot of teenagers who do theater.
Hmm.
Um,
Perfect.
I just
That's what
do,
happened.
yeah. And so we kind of speak the same language, which is fun, but not people who do it professionally. That's just, like I said, it's just not kind of where it's at for me. But I think the conversation that I've seen the most happening around eating disorders in Broadway um, is around the kind of the last frontier of diversity in staging. Oh, there's kind of two last frontiers, right? There's people of all physical abilities. Um, you see the glass ceiling being shattered by someone like Ali Stroker, the wonderful Ali Stroker, who had that incredible Tony winning role in the revival of Oklahoma, and also was in Spring Awakening, and also that the Deaf West, the wonderful
He was in
production
a
company.
wheelchair, for those who don't know.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. And then body shape, and so we have this this community and this performance space that is speaks about being diverse, and and some shows do that to better or worse degree. um and then, but everybody has like soccer player physique. And so that pressure to kind of fit into that, it can be really problematic. I mean, for example, we see a higher incidence of eating disorders in men who are gay than straight men. And so being an actor, again, not speaking from anecdotal clinical experience because that's not my niche, but can absolutely add to that. If you're expected to look like you could be in an Abercrombie and Fitch campaign. Yeah.
Yes.
And the leading men and leading ladies we see, especially leading ladies, that who are cast, it's one kind of body type.
And I think that I'm curious, and I know you don't, this is just my musings, this is not for you to answer, but I'd be really curious to see in the casting rooms kind of what they're hiring and then what those actors look like by the time they get halfway through a run, because strictly the rehearsal process, especially for a dance heavy show, is so demanding that you're going to get in really good shape, whether or not your weight changes. Like, you're going to be gaining muscle, you're going to be getting more flexible, yada yada. So if you have people that are going back to back to back on these really dance heavy musicals, they probably are going to have a within reason certain body type, assuming that that's what their body's meant to do, just because they're literally working out so much. But what if you take someone who hasn't been in intensive dance, for years, and they got the role, and all of a sudden they're thrown into a dance heavy show? How, does their body change too? Not that it needs to, but just kind of like thinking about in terms of realism. And I don't know where I'm going with this. This is just where my brain is off and running. And, maybe why we keep seeing the same faces in lead roles, musical after musical after musical, and you're not seeing a lot of new people, has been kind of my thought on that, getting those big names in there.
Yeah. I mean, it was encouraging to see, a show like Head Over Heels and see the, fantastic Bonnie Milligan in a lead role who doesn't have that typical body type. Oh my God, is she talented and fantastic, right? So I was like, why the hell can't she be the romantic lead? And she was the romantic lead. But that's an exception rather than the rule, for sure. And you also see someone like Josh Lehman, and he also doesn't have the typical body. He's the most wonderful musical comedy actor, and he can move. He can move so well, and so he doesn't have the typical dancer body, but he's a heck of a dancer.
Yeah. And that's been my thing. Like, if you can execute the required choreography and physical things for the role, it shouldn't matter about your body. That being said, I'm curious of your thoughts, because I'm torn on this one. For a show like A Chorus Line, where they're auditioning to look like a chorus line, where they're all look the same and look same height, and basically like being the Rockettes kind of thing. What would, because again, I feel like I'm on the page of, if you can do the moves, you should be good enough to get the role. But then there's those shows where I feel like body type is kind of important. Any thoughts on that? You don't have to.
Yeah, no, I do. I think that's a legitimate conversation, where the show is speaking to, right. It's one singular sensation, and they're all supposed to be like you know,
Because if anyone looked
yeah,
very different, it would be very obvious.
right. So that's kind of one side of it. And the other side of it, how would it inform the line readings and the way the lines are heard by the audience to have somebody, like, what if Cassie was like a larger woman? Like, how would that, and make you hear those lines in a different way?
Mm.
Maybe that would be really interesting,
Yeah.
right? She's rejected. She just wants to be, one of the dancers, even though, Zach sees something extraordinary in her, and is trying to kind of almost kind of push her away. I don't know. Yeah, I just think that by casting shows in different ways, you inform the text. And the good text can stand up to different interpretations. I loved when Rachel Chavkin won Tony Award for directing Hadestown, and she talked about the diversity in directors on Broadway, right? Because she was one of the only female director of a Broadway musical that season, and one of only 3 directors on Broadway that season, and all the other 2 directed plays. And talking about that, that it's not a pipeline issue, also not just for women, but for women of color as well. It's not just a pipeline issue, she said. And here we are in a field that is known for its creativity, and it can't be creative about this, and I think the same goes for casting.
Mm-hmm.
It's a world of imagination. So unless the role specifically deals with size or race or ethnicity, or disability or ability, any of those things, unless it deals with any of those specific issues, I think you could cast a role in any way. That's my opinion, and I think it just makes things more interesting.
Yeah. I guess need to get more people on board with that.
Yeah. and I've learned that comes from it comes from the top down. And so when you have diverse producers, you have a more diverse team and a more diverse cast. And when I say diverse, I mean an ethnicity, but I don't only mean an ethnicity. I also mean all these other ways that we're talking about. Yeah. So, like, for example, Emoji Land, which was this wonderful off-Broadway musical, that was about identity and about kind of wearing that identity, and and people's expectations from that, among other things, was incredibly diverse. And because it was this world existing in a phone of emojis, anybody could be anything, and it's not, and so it was a wonderfully diverse cast in terms of, not in terms of physical ability or disability, but in terms of ethnicity, in terms of, I would say there was a range of age in terms of body size. And lo and behold, the lead producer with Jacqueline Bell is a woman of color. I don't think that, I know that's not, I've learned that's not a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have diverse thought leaders to create diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I want to be conscious of your time because I know you have little ones. So unless you have any thoughts you want to wrap up on, we can close out this interview.
Just, theater is such a wonderful space, and that, most of us, our role in the theater is being the audience, and that's a wonderful role to play, because we are one half of that relationship. It's a symbiotic relationship. The show doesn't exist without an audience, and the audience doesn't exist as an audience without a show. And so we need each other, and if your role is to be a stage manager, that's awesome. If your role is to be a dresser, that's awesome. If your role is to be on stage, that's awesome. If your role is to be in the audience, that's awesome. And if that's where you get your, what you need from theater, that's fantastic. And, Broadway will be back. I don't know, maybe by the time this airs, this runs, this Broadway will be back. But it's like they say, it's a fabulous invalid. It doesn't, they're always saying it's it's a dying breed, and it never goes away. So just, it's such a wonderful gathering place, and I can't wait for it to be back. In the meantime, I'll be listening to my cast albums.
Thank you so much for coming on for this interview. If anyone wants to find out more about Dr. Drama, I'm going to have all of her links in the description below this video. So definitely go check her out, see what she's up to. She has an amazing blog where she writes all about theater and mental health. So definitely check that out as well. And I will see you all in the next video.
Thank you.
You can buy Permission to Eat on Amazon.com and anywhere else that you like to buy books online. I hope that you'll join me, and I know that you've got this.